From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. And with you once again, I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, aka D4 Derek, I'm a little under the weather this week, as you were the other week, so we both had a flu game this year with the NLSC Podcast. And that's kind of appropriate, because this episode is coming out on Michael Jordan's birthday. We're going to be talking about MJ this week, so please, tip us off.
Yeah, this episode is all about Michael Jordan as we celebrate his 63rd birthday. We'll be talking about real-life accomplishments of His Airness and also video game history related to MJ. I just wanted to kick this episode off, Andrew, by listing some of his NBA records. So, most scoring titles, 10. Highest career points per game for the regular season, 30.12 points per game. Highest career points per game playoffs, 33.4 points per game. Consecutive scoring titles, 7, which is tied with Wilt Chamberlain. Highest points per game in a final series, 41.0 in 1993 against Sir Charles. Most 50-plus point games in the playoffs, 8. Only player to win Defensive Player and scoring title in 87, 88. And just some other achievements of his: 6-time NBA champion, 5-time NBA Most Valuable Player, who's also 3 times runner-up, Andrew. 6-time NBA Finals Most Valuable Player, 10-time scoring leader, 11 times points leader, NBA Defensive Player of the Year, and he was also runner-up in 92-93, NBA Rookie of the Year, 84-85, 14-time NBA All-Star, 3-time NBA All-Star Game Most Valuable Player, 2-time NBA Slam Dunk Champion in 87 and 88. He was also the runner-up in 85. 3 times steals leader, 2 times minutes leader, 9 times win shares leader, Andrew, 7 times per leader, 9 times a box plus minus leader, 2 times IBM award winner, 11 times all NBA selection, which was 10 times for the first team, and 1 selection on the second team in 1985, 9-time all defensive selection, and all of those times were on the first team in 1988, 1989, 1990, 1991, 1992, 1993, 1996, 1997, and 1998. NBA All-Rookie selection on the first team in 1985. NBA 1980s All-Decade First Team, NBA 1990s All-Decade First Team. Selected in 1996 as one of the 50 greatest players in NBA history. Selected in 2021 to the NBA 75th Anniversary Team. 25-time NBA Player of the Week, 16-time NBA Player of the Month, 3-time NBA Rookie of the Month, NBA 30,000 Career Points Trophy in 2002. Obviously, number 23 was retired by the Chicago Bulls, but also, Andrew, number 23 was retired by the Miami Heat. Mm-hmm. And then the NBA MVP trophy was renamed the Michael Jordan Trophy in 2022. So those are just his NBA accomplishments. Pretty impressive stuff.
Absolutely, one of the most impressive NBA resumes. And it's funny because, obviously he has beef with Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas talked about how, MJ doesn't have any records. You mentioned a couple that he has. Does he have some of the longevity records as far as totals? No. But to that point, that was never an issue until more recently. Even when he retired in 1993, much further short of the career totals that he eventually amassed, that was not an issue. It came down to what he accomplished in the time, how good he was on the court, and what a spectacular player. The game winners, the dunks, the acrobatic layups, just the way when he got into a zone to score, and of course, defensively as well. Yeah, my favourite player of all time, my pick for the greatest player of all time, and certainly one of the most special players we've ever seen on the hardwood.
He also had countless college achievements, accolades, and whatnot. I'm not going to go down that list, but incredibly accomplished at the high school, college, and pro level. Also, it states that in middle school, Andrew, Dixie Youth Baseball Association, Mr. Baseball in 1975, Little League Baseball State Championship in 1975. He was also the Little League MVP that year, and Trask Middle School Outstanding Athlete 1977. So he could play a little baseball, right, before, the whole Birmingham Barons stint and whatnot. So some baseball achievements there for you.
Yeah, pulling out some obscure ones there. Really cool. And of course, it's also been noted that he never lost a championship series. Whenever he was in a position to win a championship in college, in the NBA, in the Olympics, whatever, I believe he is 11-0 in championship games or championship series.
Another undefeated record of his. United States national team, undefeated. U.S. national team record, 30-0. Three-time USA Basketball Male Athlete of the Year, 1983, 1984 with Sam Perkins, and 1992 as a member of the Dream Team. Pan American Games gold medal, Pan American Games most outstanding player in 1983, same year, two-time Olympic gold medalist, 84 and 92, FIBA America's Championship gold medal, 1992, selected in 2023 as one of the 75 greatest athletes in Pan American Games history. So, a lot of great stuff on the real hardwood. I did want to say that one of my fondest memories was actually Jordan in a Wizards jersey. And I talked about this on a prior show, is actually the preseason game that they played against the Nets on August 31st, 2001. And I'll read the part of the Tuts Daily article about that game. Jordan wows crowd with 41 points in preseason game. Michael Jordan has temporarily silenced his comeback critics, at least those who said he had lost a step. Jordan officially returned to his old form on Saturday in a preseason game against the New Jersey Nets, as he erupted for 41 points in the Washington Wizards' 102-95 loss in front of a sellout crowd at home. And in typical Jordan fashion, the five-time MVP and six-time NBA champion also incited the third quarter Wizards surge that nearly brought his team to a come-from-behind victory. With Washington down by 18 early in the third, Jordan caught fire, scoring 16 of the Wizards' 20 points over a 5-minute stretch. During the run, he shot 6 for 6 from the field, including back-to-back three-pointers, and his first dunk since he announced his second return to the NBA earlier this month. When Wizards coach Doug Collins gave Jordan a much-needed rest with 5:36 to play in the quarter, the Nets' lead had been whittled down to just 2 points. And Andrew, listen to these numbers for this preseason game. Remember, he had just come back after a long break. Says for the game, Jordan shot 15 of 24 from the field, 9 of 11 from the line, and 2 for 2 from 3 in 33 minutes of action. The beefed up version of Jordan, now a thicker 216 pounds, started in the small forward spot instead of his trademark shooting guard position. He also grabbed 6 rebounds and dished out 2 assists, including a textbook no-look pass to Courtney Alexander. And then it goes on to state that one of the key shots that were taken in the game was unfortunately taken by Tyronn Lue, which, you don't want Lue taking a shot instead of Jordan, Andrew. No. But the reason why I'm bringing up this game again is because this was such a big deal for me and my brothers, and we were glued to the TV. This game was nationally televised, and it was so great to see him back. And I remember there were comments before the game. I think it was from John Thompson, and he stated something about, we're not going to be seeing Air Jordan, we're going to be seeing ground Jordan, basically stating, don't expect to see what you saw before. But when you watch that game and him still pulling up all over the place, fadeaways, hitting shots in the mid-range, finding ways to get to the hoop, he could still move, he could still play. And it was just really cool to see him back and performing.
On a bad knee with problems with his hand, when he suffered that cut to his hand, not being able to palm the ball properly, not being able to dribble it as well as he used to before that injury to his hand, and of course the knee problems, not fun at all. Yeah, the Wizards years are kind of underrated, and they're always going to be weird for me, being a Bulls fan. I'm never going to enjoy them quite as much as the Bulls years, obviously. It's always going to be a little bit weird to look back and see him in that Wizards jersey, but I've come to appreciate it, especially when you crunch the numbers, and we've done that before, crunching the numbers as the season went on, as he started to find his rhythm and started to lead the Wizards to some pretty good wins and to that 4th or 5th seed, averaging 30 points per game, leading up to that collision with Etan Thomas and really aggravating that knee issue. And of course, that did basically put him out for the season, did try to come back for those 7 games coming off the bench. That was very weird to see as well, MJ coming off the bench. And then 15 games off the bench to begin the 2003 season, also very weird. So it is always going to be strange. It's not going to be quite as special or as enjoyable as the Bulls years for me, being the Bulls fan that I am, but I really have come to appreciate the Wizards years for what they were.
Yeah, a couple numbers real quick, Wizards related. So their performance in the 30 games preceding his knee injury, the Wizards went 21-9, performing at a 57-win pace. Prior to the injury, Jordan was averaging roughly 25 to 26 points per game, 6 rebounds and 5 assists per game. He was considered an MVP candidate at that point, which I've shown those articles touting that on social media. Because I think a lot of people forget that before that knee injury, the Wizards, were destined to not only make the playoffs, but be a top 4 seed. And Jordan was primed for a playoff run. And unfortunately, like the knee injury just ruined all of that. But yeah, he was no joke before that injury. And I think that the Wizards were going to make a run in the East that year.
It really did feel like it. Yeah. And of course, I was still going for the Bulls, but because MJ was there, pretty much the only time in my NBA fandom that I've kind of split fandom between two teams, obviously wanting the Bulls to win. They were in a very bad spot at that time. They were definitely rebuilding at that time. But with MJ on the Wizards, I was following the Wizards a little bit more closely. I knew I wasn't going to be a lifelong fan. I wasn't going to bandwagon beyond his stint with the Wizards. But yeah, I was watching him, obviously, and hoping to see him succeed. And I think a lot of people do look at those Wizards years and they equate them to Raptors Hakeem or Sonics Ewing or Magic Ewing.
Not even close.
Exactly, close. Exactly. Sure, are they the worst years of his career that weren't completely destroyed by injury or that he wasn't coming back halfway through the season or less than halfway through the season? Sure. He was in his 40s by the end of his career. He was dealing with those knee problems and so forth. But compared to Hakeem with the Raptors, and even the last couple of years with the Rockets, honestly, or Ewing with the Sonics or the Magic, yeah, MJ was way ahead of that.
Like, get this. So, pre-injury first 46 games, 20, and this is the 01-02 season, 25.1 points, 6.2 rebounds, 5.3 assists. Last 10 games before the injury, 29.7 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 6.1 assists. Goes down with the injury. The last 14 games of the season post-injury, 15.7 points per game, 3.8 rebounds, 4.8 assists. They were 26-20 before the injury, 1-9 after his absence, and 13-0 when him and Rip played together healthy. Just some monster numbers, though, before going down. That's a lot about Wizards, MJ. But before we get to the video game portion of this show, what are your fondest memories of your favorite player in basketball history? The guy that got you into hoops, the guy that got you into basketball video games.
It was seeing him pretty much every week doing something special in NBA action. Pretty much guaranteed to be in the courtside countdown every week. I suppose there were some weeks that he wasn't. There were other players doing great things. And, of course, role players would come out with some incredible stuff. That's the great thing about having a weekly top 10, of course. But the 97 and 98 seasons, it's very difficult to separate the two. And I know 96 was the one that got me into basketball, really solidified my basketball fandom. So that's always going to be special. But I really followed along just so intently 97 and 98. And 98 in particular, The Last Dance, having the internet, because we got online, my family, in August 1997. So I was finally able to get online, able to check the scores, every day or at least every few days, because once again, we're on dial-up. Can't just bring up the internet whenever we want, Derek. But following along as closely as I did, see him and the Bulls have a bit of a slow start, but they start to get it together. He takes over a couple other players to get the lead in scoring again, to get his 10th scoring title. Just watching him lead that depleted team. Scottie Pippen missed almost half the season that year, and yet they still went 62-20 on the year. They still had the best record by the All-Star break in the East. So this idea that MJ couldn't win without Pippen, that he couldn't carry the Bulls for that long stretch in 97-98, where he was obviously getting older, where he did have an aging team, didn't have some of the talent he had in previous years. Just watching him go to work, having those big scoring nights, yeah, that was so special.
I don't think Jordan ever had incredible teams. I don't think he ever had stacked teams. And my brothers and I talk about this sometimes. If you look like at his first 3 championships as well, and you look at how subpar his supporting cast is, especially on the bench, and surrounded by an aged Bill Cartwright, and who wasn't moving like he used to after his injuries. And, you had a solid player in Horace Grant and an up-and-comer in Scottie Pippen and whatnot. But that team was far from a super team. That team was far from stacked. And the NBA was loaded at the time. And I just think that he won with a lot less than, a lot of other legends in his career. And I've always marveled at that. I've always been impressed by that. Another memory that I'll bring up from MJ, and I brought this up on a prior show, is just sitting in front of my TV as a really young kid, and my dad standing behind us, and we're watching the 1992 NBA Finals, and my dad just ripping into Jordan, just calling him a ball hog, and stating, the team that plays the best team ball is going to win, and you can't be rooting for Jordan and all that. And he was pulling so hard for Clyde Drexler and the Portland Trailblazers, and obviously Jordan shut him up with the magical Game 1 performance and whatnot. But yeah, it's important to note that even as young kids, Jordan wasn't pushed on us, right, in our house. And oftentimes it was, let's take Jordan down, and Jordan's not that great, and he's a ball hog, and all of that stuff that was being said in our house, right? And you actually heard that sometimes in the media as well. And Jeff Van Gundy obviously taking shots at Jordan as well, which is not a good idea. And Jordan came back and destroyed Van Gundy and the Knicks. But I never fell for any of that. I was just always blown away by the talent, by the skill level, by the clutch moments, the shot making, the athleticism, just the overall skill. It just always blew me away. And I'm just as impressed now as I've always been, looking back at that footage. It doesn't look any less impressive to me, whether it's in slow motion, whether it's in regular motion, whether it's in 30 FPS or 60 FPS, it doesn't matter. Just he's by far the best basketball player that I've ever seen.
Agreed. And when you just watch him lock in and play the game so beautifully as he did, yeah, you can't help but be impressed by MJ. And it was so special to watch him just go to work and make all these amazing shots. And here's the thing, not every shot was an amazing one, not every basket was a spectacular one, but even the basic shots, they still looked entertaining. Watching him back down and hit that great fadeaway, or just pull up in the mid-range and just nail that shot, nothing but net, barely touching the net. He had such a fantastic shooting touch, and of course the way he could get to the basket, the way he could flip it in. When he did want to get spectacular, he is one of the most spectacular players of all time. So, yeah, just amazing to watch. I brought up watching the game against the Mavericks on my birthday last year. He scored 41 in that game, my 41st birthday. So I thought, that'll be a nice little tribute to watch on that day. And it's the one where Bubba Wells fouling Rodman, fouls out in 3 minutes. But as I said when we talked about that on a previous show, MJ is kind of going through the motions through the first half. It's the Mavericks, the lowly Dallas Mavericks of 97-98. But they are still sticking around. It's clear that they're not going to go away quietly into the night until he puts them away. So in the second half, he just locks in. He's just absolutely in the zone, knocking down shots. Like I say, barely touching the net, let alone the rim going through. Just a magnificent performance that shows he could turn it on at any given time. And I think you're absolutely right that he didn't have the most talented teams. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that all 6 of the Bulls championships, they may have been favoured because of him, and certainly Scottie Pippen. Maybe at the top they were favoured, but if you go down the roster, I think their opponents were more talented, top to bottom.
Oh, no, absolutely. I also want to point out another moment that sticks out with Jordan, and this has been talked about quite a bit on social media recently. Handles like Throwback Hoops and whatnot, posting the video of highlights related to this, but the game where Derek Martin, he was trash talking Jordan. He stated, "Told you we were going to whoop your ass tonight." And at that time, Jordan was just kind of going through the motions and kind of having an off shooting game. But he really pissed Jordan off, and Jordan responded by scoring 19 points in the final 6 minutes to win. It's that competitive nature and just the way he played that was so fun to watch as a fan. And I miss that. I miss players being that competitive today. I'm not saying that everybody's going to be as competitive as Michael Jordan was, right?
Yeah.
But just that, that want to win, that will to win, the not backing down from a challenge and whatnot. I also want to point out that I think the most impressive part of Michael Jordan's game is that he could go 4 for 19 for a stretch and all 19 shots look awesome, look great. Everyone looks like it's going to go in, right? Just he was so in control all the time. His body, the way he used it, the way he would rise up, and just his form, whether it be on a jump shot, a fadeaway, going to the hoop, a layup, a dunk. His form was just always so great. And he's the only player that I've ever watched where he could go, I don't know, he could have a game where he went 5 for 20, and I could still think that he looked good because of that.
And even if it was an off night, if there was a big shot at the end, he wanted to take it.
Right.
And you also remind me of a story that Kevin Garnett has told, and Isaiah Ryder has told it as well, because they were playing for the Timberwolves at the time. The Timberwolves were taking it to the Bulls. This is Kevin Garnett's rookie season, his only season that he played with J.R. Ryder. And Ryder is basically telling KG to settle down, don't trash talk. But KG, competitor himself, certainly a trash talker himself, he's giving MJ the business. And Ryder recalled saying, no, look, sorry, MJ, it's not me, don't worry about him, he's young, he doesn't know any better. And of course, MJ then just turned it around and, led the Bulls to victory. And KG has recalled that as being a very humbling moment and realising the greatness of MJ, and why you don't necessarily trash talk him. But again, a very fun story of that competitive nature back in the 90s. A couple of players going at it. You got to hand it to KG for having that competitive spirit and not being intimidated by the great Michael Jordan, but probably not the best idea as his slightly older but still very brash teammate. That's the funny thing about it, Derek, when Isaiah Ryder is the voice of reason in the situation.
Yeah, I just think the moral of the story is don't trash talk MJ.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's about it.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, NBA-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at NBA-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So why don't we get to Michael Jordan in video games, the history of that. And I know that you wanted to lead off this segment, so take it away.
Yeah, so it's funny because we think about Michael Jordan as being always absent from video games. He was the elusive player that we could never have in games. He was roster player, or the most prominent roster player in games. But in his early days, early on in his career, as you know, Derek, he was actually featured quite prominently in most licensed games. He was in Lakers vs. Celtics as a member of the Bulls and also the East All-Stars. EA Sports, or actually they were just Electronic Arts at that time, no EA Sports label, they made Jordan vs. Bird, but they worked very closely with Larry Bird and Michael Jordan for authenticity, as you know. And he continued to appear in the NBA playoff series by EA. He was also in Tecmo Super NBA Basketball and the NES version, Tecmo NBA Basketball, but he was actually removed from later revisions of Tecmo Super NBA Basketball. And this is courtesy of the Cutting Room Floor, a great resource for cut content and other differences between different versions and revisions of video games, including basketball games. And the first release of Tecmo Super NBA Basketball has a serial code XM. The later version has a serial code NA. And MJ is in the XM version. NA, he was removed. And then when it was released for Sega Genesis, or Mega Drive in PAL regions, that version was missing both MJ and Reggie Lewis, who had passed away. So at that point, he did become exclusive to EA. And of course, that also led to Michael Jordan in Flight. I recently posted some clips of that on our Facebook page and other social media platforms. Drew some snarky remarks. It is a game that hasn't necessarily aged well, but I do think it is a pioneering title as far as PC basketball gaming as a 3D game in the early 90s. And of course, there is the platformer Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City. So he was exclusive to EA long before he was exclusive to 2K. But then he retired, of course, he makes the comeback, and they were never able to get him during his second Bulls stint. He did become a roster player at that point, or in a couple of games he was just completely absent, replaced by somebody else in the lineup, usually Tony Kukoc or Steve Kerr, as the case may be. But yeah, for the second three-peat, we had no official representation of Michael Jordan in video games. In fact, Space Jam was the only game during that time that actually had him, the Space Jam tie-in video game. And then finally, in 1999, after he retired for the second but not final time, he was added as a legend in NBA Live 2000, which was a big deal. And that got him into the game as a legend. Of course, he was present in games for his Wizards comeback. EA were able to do a little bit more because they had that Legends deal with him as well. They had him right through until NBA Live 2004, in fact. But after that, he was missing again for years until, of course, 2K brought him back with NBA 2K11, the Jordan Challenge, the cover, all that good stuff. So it's kind of funny. We do think of him as being missing from games, but early on in his career, he definitely was available on the virtual hardwood. And in retirement, during the last 10-15 years, he's been readily available in 2K.
Yeah, my earliest memory of Michael Jordan in basketball video games is Jordan versus Bird for the NES. And Andrew, this game has one of the coolest manuals, if not the coolest, in basketball history. I want to read parts of the NES manual, and it really speaks to hardcore basketball fans at the time. And, you know, you look at this game and you probably think, well, it's primitive, right? It's not very deep from a gameplay perspective. It's 8-bit. It's on the NES, etc. But I want you to listen to how hard they worked on this game. I want you to listen to how involved Jordan and Bird were in the making of this game. So here, this is straight from the manual. It states, sweet spots, weak spots, and shooting percentages. The computer-generated characters you're about to see were originally created with the help of Larry Bird and Michael Jordan. If you're a fan of Larry and Michael, you probably know how, when, and where they like to shoot. So does the computer. Each player's approximate sweet spots, weak spots, and shooting percentages, guarded and unguarded, have been programmed in. Your score will depend on whether you're Michael or Larry, your timing, how well you're being guarded, and where you're shooting from. How cool is that? In an NES game, Andrew, in an 8-bit game. And it continues. It's the player of the decade versus the heir apparent. The shooter, Larry Bird. His turnaround and fadeaway jump shots leave a colorful blur of rainbows in your eyes. Nearly a decade into his award-laden pro basketball career, Bird continues to prove himself an all-star performer who can swish the ball from almost anywhere on the court. Going shirt to shirt with the shooter means battling one of basketball's best. And then it states, the slammer, Michael Jordan. His aerial show seems to defy the laws of physics, but he's also a stealing, rebounding, and point-making machine. Jordan's fast hands, devastating drives, and all-around aggressive play make him one of basketball's most respected and entertaining players. It'll take a real shooting star to hammer the slammer. Pretty cool intro in that manual, but it gets cooler a little bit later, Andrew. But I wanted to know, did you ever play the NES version of Jordan versus Bird, or were you just on PC?
Just on PC, and many years after it came out. I have connected with you to play it, of course, over Parsec, but no.
Yes, we did. We did play that.
But yeah,
yes.
No, I didn't grow up playing it. Actually, I have looked it up. Although the Game Boy version came out in PAL regions, for some reason, the NES version didn't. Only the PC version and the Game Boy version. Possibly a couple other versions, but not the NES version. Again, very weird. Could have been a rights thing, a distribution deal. That did happen with games back in the day from time to time. But anyway, yeah, didn't play it until years later on PC, then a little bit later again with you over Parsec on NES. But yeah, how awesome is that manual? I love them going into the detail. I love how they're just celebrating the sport, celebrating the players. They're not lying about how they've put in all that work, about the realism in that game. It is way ahead of its time with how it plays, but you can just hear the love that went into the game, hear the passion for the sport, and how good were manuals for video games back in the day. You'd get the game, you'd rip open the box, you'd be in the car ride home, you'd just be reading that manual cover to cover, just learning everything you could about that game before you popped it in for the first time. I miss manuals.
Yeah, they were really cool. There's some other really cool ones out there, like the College Slam manual and whatnot. Just a lot of the old manuals, they put a lot of love into them. I wanted to get a little bit further into this manual for Jordan versus Bird because there's just a lot of cool things in here. It talks about violations and fouls. There's a page for that. And Michael Jordan says, Larry fouls all the time, but it's not that obvious. He gives a little bump and falls away. Larry responds with, most fouls are committed because players are caught by surprise. Either they haven't studied their opponent's offensive moves or they aren't concentrating. And then further down it states, the evolution of Michael's dunk, and this is Michael Jordan's quote in the manual. In my neighborhood, we had goals that were lower than 10 feet. If you could reach the basket, then you could start getting the timing down. That's when creativity became a part of it. You get the timing down, and it's not long before you start looking good. I was barely dunking in the 9th grade, and I wasn't dunking forcefully until 11th. My first dunk was in a high school JV game, and it was a mistake. I didn't think I was high enough, but I found out that I was. I was actually going for a layup. The guys called it the baby dunk. I couldn't do it during practice. In the game situation, the intensity was so high, I was able to do it. I was happy about the dunk, but we still lost the game. How do I create the dunks I do? It's sort of like the first one. It just happens when I'm in the air. I don't know if I can do it until I've done it. I create most of my dunks as I'm doing them in a game. I mean, how cool is that story? So his first dunk was a mistake. I've tried the majority of my life to dunk, and I can't do it on purpose, Andrew. So that is pretty cool, and it's cool to see that story in this manual.
Oh, I love it. I love a bit of banter between them as well, talking about the fouls on top of that. Yeah, I believe the PC manual is very similar, and I've read through that, and yeah, again, just the amount of love that went into this game. You know, it's not just about the game itself, but learning about the players, hearing their stories. Yeah, it's absolutely worth reading.
I'll just give a little bit more of this one because I think it's going to be interesting for our listeners. It says, offensive notebook, Michael's tips. I'm a better shooter coming off the dribble than I am a standstill jump shooter. I'm a better shooter if I can take the dribble this way or that way and go up for the jump shot. The jab step is a weapon I use to keep the defense honest. If he's playing me for the drive, he's playing me close up. I use the jab step as I'm going to fake for a drive. If he retreats, he opens me up for the jump shot and gives me more room to operate. If I jab step and he stays, that's my key to go past. If Larry's playing me, he'd probably play me off of the drive, so I'd take the jump shot. If my jump shot isn't falling, I'd close on him and back him in until he's close to me. Then I can use my quickness to get past him. And then he states, use the crossover step in combination with your fake jumper. If Larry plays up for the jump block, spin around him and drive for the jam. If he plays for the drive, advance with your back to him and position yourself to either use the turnaround jumper if he plays off you, or step and slam if he's too close. Of course, I could always show him my aerial 360. And then Larry goes on to give his tips. I'm not going to read all of this, but he states things like watch out for Michael's quickness, try to get him off balance with jabs and fakes, etc. And just really cool stuff. There's a defensive notebook, Michael's tips and Larry's tips. And Jordan's complimenting Bird here. He's like, Larry can shoot it from any stance. He's got one of those fake shots where he can fake it, but it looks like he's going to shoot it, etc. Just, I recommend people downloading the PDF. Like Google Jordan versus Bird manual, NES manual, and download that PDF because this is one of the coolest things I've ever seen.
Definitely worth a read, for sure. And you and I had different experiences with Michael Jordan in video games, much as we had different experiences growing up watching the NBA. You getting into the sport and the NBA earlier than I did. By the time that I was getting into basketball and basketball gaming, you know, MJ wasn't in the games. We had to create him. So a lot of my memories of Michael Jordan and basketball video games is adding him to NBA Live, adding him to roster updates, and discovering the NLSC when my family got the internet in August 1997, discovering what our founders had done with the editors, and giving him his draft information and his date of birth and other missing information that you can't add in Create a Player. So for me, with MJ in video games, until NBA Live 2000, and that was certainly very exciting to get that news, logging onto the NLSC and seeing Lutz post the update that Michael Jordan has been added to the roster of legends. I was hoping to be able to get a new computer and NBA Live 2000 at that time, so that only increased my anticipation for that happening. But yeah, a lot of my memories of MJ in video games are modding him in, whereas you grew up with games where he was already in the game. So I was wondering, what was it like playing with and against MJ in those early games? Obviously, Jordan vs. Bird is a great title. Some of those early 5-on-5 games, I respect them, I can enjoy them, but they don't hold up as well as Live 95 onwards. Did you enjoy playing with and against MJ in those games?
Yeah, so the 4 games that I played with Michael Jordan before you ever used him in a video game it was Jordan versus Bird, Bulls versus Blazers, Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, and NBA Showdown. Those are the earliest games I ever used Michael Jordan. And that was before you even got into basketball, right? When I was playing those titles.
Yep.
I remember not being happy with the fact that in Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, Jordan had hair. Every single player in Tecmo Super NBA Basketball has hair.
Everyone is Michael Cage.
Advantage. Right, exactly. Or Robert Reed, a young Robert Reed with that hair.
Yeah.
But it was always cooler to use MJ in a game like Bulls versus Blazers, where he was bald and Larry Bird was blonde, right, et cetera. Or you use him in NBA Showdown and he's bald, so it's more lifelike. And that's what you saw on TV. That's what you wanted to experience in the video game. And of course, in Jordan versus Bird, he was bald, and they did the best they could with those graphics for his likeness and whatnot. Tecmo Super NBA Basketball oftentimes played better than NBA Showdown and Bulls versus Blazers with using Jordan for the fact that Tecmo was faster, right? It was more like real basketball pace. And in NBA Showdown and Bulls versus Blazers, it was kind of a bummer using MJ in those games because those games just were so slow. And MJ didn't feel really fast in those games. And, you really want to like do a quick first step or get to the hoop fast with him. But yeah, everybody's kind of moving at the same pace and whatnot. Using MJ in those games just never felt like actually using Michael Jordan. However, you could hit more shots with him oftentimes, especially in the mid-range, and he would throw it down more than a lot of the other players in those games. I will say that playing against him, my memories are he would shoot a lot, especially I want to say it was in Bulls versus Blazers. He would take a lot of shots, and I think he would hit a lot of shots. But the majority of the time when I played those games in the past, I wasn't playing against the computer. I was playing against my brothers.
Oh, for sure. And I have to agree, having gone back and played those games to review them for Way Back Wednesday, Tecmo Super NBA Basketball, although it is a letdown, graphically speaking, as far as not having that player differentiation, having different player heads, it does play a little bit faster. It has a better pace than EA's games. Although I do like the signature moves in the NBA Playoff Series. That is something that NBA Live, the early NBA Live games, did lose. They made a lot of other great improvements from the early NBA Playoffs games, but we lost the signature moves.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue with Tecmo Super NBA Basketball is the lack of authenticity, going from, the way the players look and then, how they perform on the floor. But from a pace perspective, I enjoyed it more than Bulls versus Blazers and NBA Showdown. I think it's also worth mentioning that one of the earliest games that I also used MJ, after the titles that I mentioned, was actually in NBA Live 96. We had the ability to go into the create a player, put in Michael Jordan, and there he was. Michael Jordan, all of his stuff, North Carolina, 6'6", the correct weight, all of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it looked like MJ. And NBA Live, EA Sports, they got in trouble for doing this, but I'm happy they did it because my brother and I would, we would plug him in and use him either on the Bulls or we would create a Legends team. You could create other Legends using the hidden players like Wilt Chamberlain and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson, etc., and Julius Erving. So, NBA Live 96, absolutely loved using MJ in Live 96. And at that point, that was the most fun I've had using him for the fact that, the game moved so fast and you could throw alley-oops to him. And, it was awesome. I also want to point out that I learned about a lot of different dunks, going back to Jordan versus Bird because of the dunk contest in that game and using MJ, like the toss slam and the kiss the rim and all of that. And that just was such a cool feature in that game, the dunk contest, and, selecting the dunk and having to take off from a certain part of the floor. And it could get really challenging to complete the dunk, effectively and get a high score.
Yeah, it could be argued that we didn't see another great dunk contest mode in video games until NBA Live 2005. Done that well, done that enjoyably, I think. And that was a great feature in Live 96, the 16-bit versions of NBA Live 96. As you said, EA did get in trouble for that, but fortunately they didn't lose the license, but it did mean they had to take it out of the PC version, which came out later. Of course, it did have the full creator player and later modding, thanks to our founders, so there were ways to get MJ into the game anyway. And Live 96 PC being one of my first basketball video games, actually coming up on 30 years since I bought that and played it for the first time, many memories of adding MJ to the rosters and learning how to do proper roster updates when I discovered the modding scene at the NLSC and what other people were doing. And because the creative players were using the same variety of head models that the original players were, they really blended in on the court. So it didn't really feel like MJ was missing, especially once you did punch in his missing information, drafted information and so forth. Yes, when he doesn't have a portrait, that does stand out, but we made the most of it. And of course, that is something we did throughout the late 90s, adding him to the game through modding. But it was so special when he was officially added again, because you have the portrait there by default, you have the great face textures, and there's a really great face texture in NBA Live 2000 for MJ, actually. You have the audio, you have the commentator and the arena audio calling him by name. He's there officially. He's got all the career stats, things that you can put in through modding, but it's just that much better when it's there by default, especially on console, obviously.
Yeah, nothing beats him being in the game by default, right? And you go to a game like NBA Live 2000, where I think the mechanics are really solid. My brother and I have actually played it quite a bit. Over the last 3 nights, we've been playing our Legends season and using MJ, who's officially in that game. Sure, he hadn't made his NBA comeback yet. He's a legend in the game, but you can put him on different teams. You can create a Legends team, etc. And, you start feeling like you're really using Michael Jordan when you get into the early 2000s. You can make those quick moves. You can explode to the rim. You can get out on the fast break. You can, switch hands in the air on layups, etc. And then, you get to a game like NBA Live 2003, and Jordan's officially in the game on the Wizards, but he's also a legend in the game. And you're using the Legends version of MJ, and you're holding the ball out, right, with one hand like he did in real life. And you're getting that quick first step. You're doing the jab steps. You're exploding, off the floor and throwing it down in traffic. You're hitting those fadeaways because NBA Live 2003 and Live 2004 have an underrated post game and whatnot. You're spinning baseline and, you're throwing it down. So in the early 2000s, we really started to get a taste of what it could be like to use MJ, more like his real life counterpart in video games. And the 2Ks at that time, I don't feel like it was as fun to use him in those games because it didn't have the right stick usage, which allowed you to do a lot of the moves that Jordan did in real life. But yeah, you had Jordan on the all-decade teams, and you had him on the Wizards when he was there, and it was still fun to use him in those games as well. And then obviously the hiatus, right? But I know that you have strong memories of using MJ in the early 2000s on NBA Live.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And once again, kind of weird to have him on the Wizards, but you did have the 90s All-Stars version, the Legends Pool version. We made plenty of throwback rosters, obviously. I made my 96 roster for NBA Live 2004. Quite a few players already in the game. One of the last NBA Live games from that generation that had a pretty good complement of retro players. And that is something that you also forget when you go back and look at the default rosters of, say, Live 06 PC. Just how thin the 90s All-Stars roster is. It's why I'm working on that minimalist update to add some missing legends to that game, because it's been a while. I've just been updating my current roster that I'd been working on for years, and just updating throughout the years with every season. I'd forgotten just how many players I'd added to that 90s All-Stars team. So it was a shame that we lost, MJ. Also, Live 2005, just as we got the All-Star weekend, we lost MJ from the game. Would have been nice to put him on the floor and go head-to-head with Dominic Wilkins. Of course, with modding we can do that, and it looks great and it's fun to do, but once again, there is something special about having an official appearance for MJ.
Yeah, I mean, the MJ mods at NBA 2K10, if somebody didn't know that Michael Jordan was officially not in the game, they would think he was officially in it. Those mods are so accurate. The face is perfect. The cyber face is perfect. You can equip animations that look lifelike for MJ. We played a bunch of games, on NBA 2K10, using like the 96-97 roster, and you literally feel like you're using MJ. It's so well done. Right. But then we got MJ officially in NBA 2K11, and I still think it's by far the best representation of Michael Jordan, as far as, the way he plays on the court, all the signature moves, his, fadeaway off 1 foot, his moves around the basket, just everything is pretty much perfect, in my opinion, with MJ in NBA 2K11. I think they've taken major step backs with his accuracy over the years, especially on PS5 gen NBA 2Ks. I think he's lost a lot of the accuracy that made him so fun to use in NBA 2K11, and I just think those mechanics don't work as well as they did in NBA 2K11, 2K12, 2K13. etc. So, 2K11, awesome using MJ. Same with NBA 2K12. Still kept all those signature moves that were in 2K11. NBA 2K13, they bring in right stick dribbling, and that helps, with, executing certain moves with MJ, and the post game improved in that game. So you're doing more moves in the post. You're spinning off of your defender and going baseline, etc. I think that MJ just plays so awesome in NBA 2K11 through NBA 2K13.
Absolutely. And just the attention to detail, the moves, the animations, the face, the fact that the tongue comes out. How many wish lists, if you go back to the late 90s, how many wish lists talked about, wouldn't it be cool if MJ's tongue wagged? If we got MJ in the game and he had his famous tongue wagging on dunks and reverse layups and so forth. And was it probably going to happen with the technology of the time? No, probably not. But once they got there with the 7th generation, with Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and the PC ports, of course, they just did a fantastic job. So I'd agree that was the peak of MJ on the virtual hardwood. But with that being said, I do enjoy those earlier NBA lives as well, as you well know.
And I agree. 2K11 through 2K13, peak MJ in video games. But let's get to the community's thoughts. I asked favorite MJ-related real-life basketball memory and favorite MJ-related basketball video game memory. Steven at the Live King states, I actually studied Michael Jordan's form when learning to shoot a basketball. He had a perfect form, in my opinion. I definitely agree with you. Live King, best shooting form I've seen in basketball history. Video game wise, when I made that Live 18 MJ Spotlight with a creative player, I gave him a lot of KD's animations, and he did a really good job with that spotlight. I remember watching that. He shared it on the NLSC, and as you know, Live 18 is incredibly limited from a player creation perspective, but because of the way he showed off that footage, the animations that he assigned, I thought he did a really good job, doing the best he possibly could to represent MJ in a game where he wasn't officially in it.
Absolutely. I remember that being very impressive as well. And unfortunately, it wasn't like NBA 2K10, where you had a dunk package named Air. Oh, that could be anyone, Derek. That could be for anyone, that dunk package.
Right.
But, nothing like that, but made the most of it. Live King's got a long history of tinkering with games, sliders, rosters, etc., to find the optimal experience. And I absolutely respect those efforts, and that is something that's important in our community.
NBA 2K Fadeaway at NBA 2K Fadeaway states, I knew MJ for his spectacular moves from highlights, but when I first watched his full games on TV, I realized that most of his points were 2-point shots. And I remember how I was disappointed and waited for his circus shots. I personally love everything that he could do inside the 3-point line. I thought just his ability to do that one dribble pull-up, to get his defender off balance and go to the rim, just the acrobatic moves in the air, the post fadeaways on guys like Anthony Mason. It didn't matter how big the defender was, he could do, create space and get that post fadeaway off, and he shot such a high percentage of it. Just his ball handling, when he attacked the rim, his quick decisions, etc. And I was a huge fan of when he shot threes. He would only take them when he thought it made sense. He wouldn't just fire away. He wouldn't take bad shots normally. So yeah, I was a huge fan of MJ's inside the 3-point line game.
Oh, absolutely. I will say that as somebody who was watching clips, was watching highlights before I got to see full games, I do get where he's coming from. In so much as you see these dunks, you see these acrobatic layups, you see these highlights, and then you see an actual game, and you realize, oh, players aren't doing these big dunks every time down the floor. They're not doing all these fancy moves absolutely every time down the floor. That would be incredible, but it would also be incredibly difficult, incredibly draining, one would have to imagine. So I do get where he's coming from there, kind of the idea of, oh, a lot of these shots are not necessarily highlights, they're just normal shots. That being said, watching MJ go to work was watching an artist, so I absolutely agree with you there.
Yeah, I also understand that point as well. You watch a player like Charles Barkley, okay, and he's playing against the Golden State Warriors, and he put in like a 50-piece on him. And this is when he was his early years with the Suns. And, you want to see, as a basketball fan, maybe you want to see more dunks. Maybe you want to see Chuck flying through the air and throwing it down. Maybe you want to see more acrobatic moves at the rim. But if you watch those highlights, and you can YouTube those, it's a lot of mid-range jump shots, a lot of jab steps, a lot of shooting over the defense. It's a lot of offensive rebounds and putbacks and whatnot. Is it the most exciting basketball you've ever seen? I guess it depends on what type of fan you are, but I think the average fan may not think so. But at the end of the day, I love seeing that. I loved seeing the surgical approach. I love to see him, dominating guys like Chris Webber and whatnot, and those defenders just not knowing what to do with him. So yeah, personally, I enjoy those performances. T Gentry at Bucky_T states, he's the first player I tried emulating when I was in grade school. His acrobatic layups, his finesse, how high he gets on his jump shots, etc. In video games, I loved using him in the earlier 2Ks and NBA Inside Drives, NBA Lives, etc. But I really loved using him in 2K11. The most underrated mention there with NBA Inside Drive, Jordan is unbelievable in Inside Drive, and you can unlock young MJ by putting in a code, with hair, like we're talking mid-80s MJ. And he is super fun to use. And my brother and I were playing a season with him, and he can just do so much on the court. He's so quick, and he's throwing it down all the time and barely ever misses from mid-range. So yeah, Jordan in Inside Drive, definitely fun to use.
That's one that I've missed out on, not having an original Xbox, unfortunately. But I have seen your footage, obviously. We've connected on that game a couple of times. I don't know if we have actually used young MJ in our sessions. We had that incredible session, that comeback victory with the Raptors. So we might have to see if we can have another great session with young MJ. But yeah, the fact that he was in more games at that time, after being absent for so many years, was definitely welcome.
That was our best comeback in video game history. We took down the Iverson Sixers.
Yep.
Actually, in that one. But what a furious comeback. Those highlights are actually up on the NLSC YouTube. And lastly, on Twitter, Mike P43 at Mike Pritchard states, for me, watching Jordan win 3 straight rings when I first got into basketball, then retiring, coming back and winning another 3 straight can't be topped. As for gaming, me and the guys used to play 3-player co-op Bulls seasons. In the 90s, we rotated player lock each game. So one of us was locked on Jordan, one on Pippen, and the other was controlling the other 3 players. My friend was able to emulate MJ perfectly with his play, way better than I could, or my friend, while I was better on the glass with Rodman. My best memories is of gaming with friends. And yeah, same here. But best memories of gaming is with my brothers, playing locally, and MJ is a part of those memories as well.
No, that's really cool to hear, absolutely. And it reminds me, your brother enjoys playing with young MJ, doesn't he? More so than prime MJ?
So we have this rule when we start a season or association or franchise or whatever, where we all have to choose a team, where we try to not bandwagon jump. When we say bandwagon jump, we try not to use a prior championship team. And, that's the main reason. My brother, Nick, he absolutely loves using young MJ. I think he thinks that the most impressive MJ that he's ever seen is like 88, 89, 87, 88 MJ. And so usually when we start a season and we're selecting a team, if he wants to use Jordan, he's using the 88, 89 Jordan, or he's using Jordan and Woolridge together from the mid-'80s. So either a little bit of hair on Jordan or more hair like in the mid-'80s. But just what an athletic freak he was at the time. And the stuff that young MJ can pull off in video games from an athletic standpoint is so fun. We did receive one response on Discord. Juicy Shack Meat states, I was too young to appreciate Jordan's Bulls run, so his announcement to play for the Wizards is probably my personal favorite. Most fans want to wave off his Wizards run, but it was my only chance to truly experience watching Jordan as an active player. Favorite video game memory is definitely completing the Jordan challenges on 2K11, which I started in 2016, but only completed during the pandemic in 2020. I think a lot of people's fondest memories using MJ on the virtual hardwood is on 2K11.
Yeah, obviously I've got a lot of nostalgia for creating him in those late 90s NBA lives, adding him to those rosters, playing with modded-in Michael Jordan, but I was getting into 2K more at the time. I did really enjoy the Jordan Challenge. It took me a while to finish it. I think I finished it around 2016, actually. I know he said he started in 2016 and finished it come the pandemic in 2020, but to that point, for me, I went back and completed it. All the objectives, all the games I hadn't yet finished, and actually did a Way Back Wednesday series on that as well, around 2016. So yeah, even though I did complete some of my favourite games right out of the gate in the Jordan Challenge, I went back for total completion around about 2016, and that was very satisfying. So I definitely relate to that.
I believe we received one response on Facebook.
Yes, Renee gave us both a real-life and video game memory. For real life, I'm back, crying on the floor in 1996, kissing the logo in 1994, the last game at Chicago Stadium, the Scottie Pippen charity game, of course, and for video game Jordan memories, Jordan Challenge in 2K11, and finally getting his Wizards version in my eras. And we've talked about Jordan Challenge, of course, some great real-life memories there as well. But yeah, getting the Wizards version in my NBA eras, because for a long time, Derek, it looked like he was going to veto any Wizards teams among the classic teams. And at the moment, it doesn't look like we're getting any new classic teams. We're probably going to get more throwback teams by way of my NBA eras and the eras rosters for eras play now, which I think is okay. Actually, we'll be writing an article about that and giving some more thoughts on it in the future. And maybe we could talk about that on the show as well, actually. But I am glad that we do have the Wizards era through my NBA eras.
Yeah, I just wish the mechanics were better so I could use MJ like MJ, right? I think even with edits, even making him, at least comparable to what he was in real life as a basketball player at the time, from a ratings perspective and tendencies and whatnot, you still can't play with him properly on the floor. Actually, I think Wizards MJ would play more realistic in games like NBA 2K11, 2K12, 2K13, NBA 2K16, NBA 2K17, etc. In fact, I modded the 0203 Wizards into NBA 2K17. If you remember correctly, it's part of my UCTR roster, and I find him, a lot more fun to use in that game.
Definitely. And as we wrap up here, Derek, I think I'll be spending some time watching some Michael Jordan highlights today, see if I can catch a couple of classic games. That is one of my New Year's resolutions, as I talked about at the beginning of the year on the NLSC Podcast, Derek, to have some more classic games on, at least in the background, inspired by you doing that. You've talked about doing that with your brothers so many times. I've been trying to do that a bit more often as well, but going to sit down and watch some games, watch some highlight reels. There's some fantastic channels, obviously, on YouTube that are both sharing games and highlight reels, so I'll be spending some time with that. Maybe playing a favorite game with MJ in the lineup. Haven't decided which one yet, but just enjoying my fandom of Michael Jordan. And I know these days the discussion comes down to the manufactured GOAT debate, Derek, and the idea that, you're stuck in the past if you're still enjoying Michael Jordan or whatever. We're done with the 90s and all that nonsense. But to me, that is immaterial. I'm always going to be a Michael Jordan fan, the same way I'm always going to be a Simpsons fan and enjoy those classic episodes. Go back and watch them. Go back and enjoy Michael Jordan highlights, Michael Jordan games. He's always going to be a favorite. Whether other people agree or disagree that he is the greatest of all time, if I care to get into those debates, I'll argue in favor of him, obviously. But to me, that is immaterial. He was a fantastic player. He is, at the very least, one of the greatest players we've ever seen. He was a spectacular player to watch, and I, for one, am going to continue to enjoy that.
Yeah, he's the best guard defender that I've seen in basketball history and the best offensive player that I've seen in basketball history. And yeah, he's, the greatest player I've ever seen. I also want to point out about the nostalgia piece. You want to know how I know that it's not just nostalgia, Andrew? Because when I go back and I watch all of these games, I enjoy the basketball a lot more than what we're seeing today. I could watch games back to back, a game from Michael Jordan's era, and then I can watch, a game from the regular season or playoffs from, the last couple of years. And just the basketball, the way it was played, the players out there, etc. I just enjoy it so much more. My brother and I have been watching a bunch of games recently from the early 2000s, from Dirk, from KG, Vince Carter, Allen Iverson, Tracy McGrady, et cetera, et cetera. And just the basketball is so much more enjoyable to watch. I know it's not just nostalgia speaking. I love the game of basketball, and I love the way it was played back then and during Jordan's era in his best years as well.
For sure. I think I'll have to add the 1998 All-Star Game to the playlist again.
So yeah, thank you to the community for all the responses to this week's community question. Just love getting the interaction. I love hearing the stories. A lot of the stories are very similar to, what we share and, our experiences and whatnot. And some are different, which is always fun to see. So we appreciate it.
Definitely. And as always, please keep the conversation going. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. Thank you for tuning in, and a reminder that you can catch us every week on the NLSC, our YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast platforms. Also, both we and the NLSC are on social media and would appreciate a follow. So Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D for3G and at D for384. I'm also on YouTube, D for 3, and on the NLSC, D for 3.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, give a look to the NLSC itself, NBA-Live.com, for all things basketball gaming. So, thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.